These are the born losers, the sickest sickle gang that ever terrorized a town, while the law stood helpless.
Born out of war, the story behind this weird yet wonderful British creation started when the British government requested Excelsior Motorcycles of the UK to create a lightweight and functional motorcycle that could be dropped from an aeroplane behind enemy lines or into combat situations. The motorcycle needed to be small enough to fit inside a standard parachute airdrop canister, or CLE. The final design, which was no doubt inspired by the Krupp scooter of 1919, was this unusual looking collapsible motorcycle with tiny 10-inch wheels. The aim was to increase the range and the speed of paratroop movement on the ground. Once deployed, a paratrooper could remove the wheel bike, as they were called, from its container and be on the road within a very short period of time. Of course, for the paratroopers at the time, finding the container proved challenging. They could have landed some distance away from the paratroopers themselves. Once discovered, it was very easy for them to identify which of the drop containers contained the miniature motorcycles, because in large bright white lettering, written on the sides of each container, were the words "motorcycle". Once unpacked, all that was needed was to twist the handlebars into position, pull the seat up and fold the footrests out. The bike didn't have a kickstarter, so the soldiers had to run with the bike and then dump the small, thumb-operated clutch lever to start the engine. But with practice, apparently the wheel bikes could be unpacked, unfolded and started up in about 1 minute. Their 98cc Villiers 2-stroke single-cylinder engine produced 1.5 horsepower, and the bike weighed a mere 70 pounds. On smooth tarmac, top speed was 30 miles per hour, and its maximum fuel range on one tank of fuel, which was 3.7 litres, was 90 miles. But smooth tarmac was pretty hard to find on a World War II battlefield. Hence, in reality, fuel range was actually closer to 70 miles. To get out of difficult situations, the wheel bike could be lifted over obstacles, or even carried on a soldier's back with webbing, but its use in rough terrain was limited by its small wheels and lack of engine power. This, combined with the facts that it couldn't carry any equipment, had no suspension, no lights, and just a rear brake, meant that the single-speed wheel bike eventually proved impractical, and it was abandoned by the British military after less than 4,000 were built. The British weren't the only country with such machines either, but they were the first. The US military had their Cushman Model 53, which had 3 times more horsepower, but it was also more than 3 times the weight of the wheel bike, and it didn't fold up either. Its engine was a 242cc 4-stroke, and it had a 2-speed gearbox with a top speed of 40 miles per hour. Nowadays, their history makes them very interesting and collectible motorcycles. After the war, fuel rationing was still in force, and the bikes were redesigned to be more practical for civilian use. It was upgraded with a new 3 horsepower engine, a 2-speed gearbox, a kickstarter, a larger top-mounted fuel tank, doing away for the need of a fuel pump, lights, and both rear and front brakes. It was named the Corgi, apparently in honour of the low-slung dogs favoured by the British monarchy. A name that really suits it, don't you think? The British firm Brockhouse Engineering manufactured the Corgis. Brockhouse later purchased the rights to the Indian motorcycle brand and exported the Corgis to America. These bikes were all rebadged with an Indian logo on each side of the fuel tank, which was painted with the iconic shade of deep red that we all associate with an Indian motorcycle. And then they were sold using the name Indian Papoose. So in summary, the Well bike became the Corgi, and then the Indian Papoose. What actually happened with the Indian motorcycle brand name post-Second World War was absolutely bizarre, to say the least. So if you want to know more on this subject, watch the channel's doco, Harley vs Indian. It's a real eye-opener. Another iconic mini bike, manufactured just after the Second World War, was the American-made Doodlebug. Doodlebugs were powered by a 1.5 horsepower 4-stroke engine. The first Doodlebugs used Clinton engines, but the later and much more common machines used a Briggs & Stratton engine. Both employed a kickstart, and they were all painted with bright red paint. An accessory generator kit allowed fitment of a headlight and a tail light to make them street legal. Though they may have been street legal in some areas, I'm not sure how safe it would have been riding a 1.5 horsepower motorcycle with those minuscule wheels in traffic on public roads would have been. However, at the time, the Doodlebug was an interesting machine with a very cool name. During the 1950s, many mini bikes were built at home from spare parts found in garages. They commonly had lawnmower engines and made a hell of a lot of noise. A market for mini bikes developed, and many companies began manufacturing mini bikes to cash in on their popularity. Arctic Cat, Rupp, Taco. Maybe some of you even tried to do stupid stunts with them. Then, in 1961, the first mainstream motorcycle manufacturer designed a mini bike for an amusement park. This bike was just a prototype, and it was never intended to be sold to the public. But it soon became the park's most popular attraction, and Honda took notice. They refined the design and created the Honda Z50 and put it into mass production. The tiny bike was initially built small, for children, but adults loved them too. However, its compact design meant that many adult riders would have their arms and legs sticking out, and people described them as looking like monkeys, hence the nickname of Monkey Bike. They have had numerous upgrades since the very first model, with later models being manufactured to be fully street legal. With the huge success of Honda's Monkey Bike, many other mainstream manufacturers began to manufacture their own mini bikes. Suzuki Trailhopper, Kawasaki KV75, Yamaha Chappie, Harley Davidson Shortster, Indian Bambino. In Australia, we had our own Grand Prix, Deltec and Dexon mini bikes. Back in the early 1970s, choppers were all the rage, and although this bike is not truly a mini bike, I decided to include it because it is, without doubt, the most outlandish motorcycle from that era, and clearly aimed at younger riders. Inspired by the film Easy Rider, Italian firm Fantic released a 50cc chopper that featured extended forks, ape hanger handlebars, an unbelievably tall sissy bar, and an unusually shaped chromed, upswept exhaust system. It was also available with a 125cc engine. But if you think that bike was outlandish, 1 decade later, Honda introduced their totally crazy looking and miniature-sized Moto Compo. Just have a look at it, will you? Their ambitious idea was for it to fit into the boot of a car, drive into the city to park, and then use the mini bike to cover the rest of the distance to work. Powered by a 49cc air-cooled 2.5 horsepower 2-stroke engine, top speed was around 25 to 30 miles per hour. When folded, the box-shaped packaged bike is 46.5 inches long, 21.25 inches high and 9.5 inches wide. I would imagine riding something so tiny in heavy traffic would have been pretty terrifying to say the least, which is most likely what led to its sales failure. Of course, like many motorcycles, some riders end up customising their bikes. Today, mini bikes have evolved into other subcategories, including pocket bikes, which look like sports bikes and are frequently used in pocket bike racing on go-kart tracks, pit bikes, which look like motocross bikes, and mini choppers, which are mini bikes that obviously look like choppers. Mini bikes are not solely targeted at kids. So why not do the really smart thing and swap your car for one tomorrow? Cheers and safe riding.